you have interviewed and communicated with well over 500 cartoonists all throughout the world.
Right,
Now, cartoonists are in the business of making people laugh,
right,
if not just think.
right.
And do you have any anecdotes by which the funny side of the cartoonist's own character comes to light?
Uh, I probably do, but I don't think we should put them on film. I mean, I'm thinking mainly about the Cuban cartoonists and
Oh,
the
yeah.
Cuban cartoonists.
It's a hard
When
life.
I've been in Cuba, it's just it's a continual laughter. You never stop laughing because of just the cartoonists themselves are characters, and the Cubans have a sense of humor that's very self
Deprecate.
deprecating and they take pride in that even in the hardest of times they can find humor in
It's a
this.
bit like the Russian dry sense of
Yeah,
humor.
right, right.
Uh,
But you know, there've been some there've been some great moments with the cartoonists that I've had in the ones in Eastern Europe too. I remember being with 7 or 8 uh, very famous cartoonists from Russia, Ukraine, Poland, anyway, about 5 or 6 of the Slovakia, etc. And I was trying to interview them, and the drinking was so intense the entire week that I finally interviewed them when they were drunk, which was the only time I could ever find them. Because even if you started early in the morning, they were already drinking. So you're still trying to get over the drinking the night before. So it was an interesting. I couldn't use the information, but it was fun because they couldn't remember the questions. So, so but yeah, there've been the cartoonists are the cartoonists I've met, mainly those outside of the United States. The ones I've met outside of the United States have been very kind and compassionate people, people with a sense of humor, people who are willing to take time and spend time with you, and very generous with their time, with their works, etc. This house is full of cartoons that that they gave me, original works, etc. That I never asked for. I didn't have to ask for. And one I remember, um, well, this leads to another thing that I've been involved in. I've been involved in trying to preserve um, original comic art and also the memoirs and stories of cartoonists, especially in Asia. And I've been wanting to do this for a number of years, and it grew out of something that happened with a Gujarati cartoonist. And I happened to go into his office to interview him. I had an appointment on the day that he was retiring. And he had stacks, like four, as high as he could stack them without them falling over, of original works of his. And after the interview, or during the course of the interview, he says to me, "Do you want a piece of original work?" I said, "Sure." He says, "Do you want all of it?" And I said, "Of course not. It's your life's work." He said, "Today's my last day of work. Probably tomorrow they'll throw this out." And I didn't take it. I took 3 pieces because I couldn't take it anyway, and I didn't feel right taking this man's life's work. But it's probably been thrown out. And so I felt, this was in 1993, and I also saw that with some other cartoonists in Asia. I think they're starting to value their work now, the originals. But at that time they didn't. And so I've been wanting to start a center of some sort. And in China, when I mentioned this about 4 years or 5 years ago, the Communication University of China, where I'm on the faculty there, they suggested that they would start it. And the president at that time was very interested, and they started what we call the Asian Research Center on Animation and comics and comic art, Asian Research Center for Animation and Comic Art. And we had a big ceremony about 2 years ago launching that. But it hasn't gone very far since then because we don't have anyone. We have 2 people on board, but they're not very. They don't dedicate all their time to it.
Just open the door for Okay. With the work of this journal that you publish, like you said, it's an in-house production. Everything apart from the printing
Right.
happens right here, and you and your wife do it together. Is there any other kind of involvement by other people which makes it possible?
Sure. Well, first of all, there are 2 or 3 different editorial boards, and in some cases I hear from some of those. I never hear from some people, but there are others. Mike Rohde, for instance, in Washington D.C., who keeps very good contact, does all the exhibition reviews, and does some of the media, and does the media reviews and some of the book reviews. So he's been a very important person here, and of course the formatter, Jae Won Kwon. I'm sorry, I had a friend Jae Won Lee. Jae Won Kwon in Korea is doing it, and of course my wife is working very hard. She came from China. She thinks that the socialist system was much better because she didn't have to work as hard as she does with this capitalist master. I'm hoping she doesn't hear me say all that, but she says that she now has to work much harder with under this capitalist that she's married to.
Please join us.
I heard it.
You heard it, right? But she's been a fantastic help because she does all the, I write everything out by hand. She then puts it into the computer, including my articles and other people's works, etc. And of course, we have some mainstay types of contributors, who have helped us over the years: Anna Marino and Hector Fernandez, and just a number: David Barona, Mark Singer, some regular contributors who write articles, and then also a number of other people too. So yeah, there's been a lot of help, and then at other times too, some of my graduate assistants have helped. Mu Lin, who now is a professor, assistant professor, but he's when he was a graduate student, he was working with these journals, and he still is on the staff. He still does the formatting for Asian cinema. So yeah, there are a number of people who give a hand that we certainly appreciate, and also many of them who make sure that their library is subscribed. Because in the beginning, when we had just a handful of subscribers, I was running an editor's note each issue, and one of the things I would continually say is the fact that we're hoping for institutional support, not support, but institutional subscriptions, because we don't have any institutional support. This is completely separated from where I work and from any other institution. It's never received any grants. We've never applied for any grants. We're proud of that. But so these, and as I said, there's a philosophy behind it. It's a philosophy of keeping things as much as possible, keeping the writing simple, but also very diverse, and also the idea to keep it inexpensive, and also to keep it in-house as much as possible.
And independent.
Independent, that's the biggest point, right. And the journal is not peer-reviewed in the usual sense. I have talked about that in an editor's note a couple issues back, because there are some young scholars who think it should be peer-reviewed. And I understand why, because they're up for promotion or tenure, etc. But I think in terms of, I think in several ways. One is the field of comic art scholarship is new. Many of these, or a number of these papers have been given at conferences, and the people in those audiences at the conferences are the peers, basically. And so
Right.
they're hearing these papers, they're making comments on them as they're being presented. And I don't, even though I've had many peer-reviewed articles of my own, I've never appreciated that system, because I think it's the best we have. But you know, it's like the roulette wheel in the casino. It could be a crooked roulette wheel that you can never win on, but if you're an addicted gambler, you're going to go to it every time, even though that you know you're not going to win. And I believe that's the same here too, that the peer review system's the only wheel we have in town. And unfortunately, it has a lot of negative aspects, you know, such as the old boy network, and oftentimes it is an old boy network. The fact that people sit on these manuscripts for months, sometimes years. I had a manuscript years ago that the publisher kept for something like 7 or 8 years. It was on press freedom in the Philippines. By the time they would have been ready to publish it, there was no press freedom in the Philippines any longer. They never published it. They accepted it, ran it every issue. They said it's a forthcoming thing, but apparently they never had someone, never got the peer reviews back. And then also we found, you know, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal not a couple of years ago about the sciences and peer reviewing in sciences, where they're pointing out that sometimes scientists will sit on these manuscripts because the manuscripts are talking about new research that counters what they were famous for. So those things happen. And so I haven't gone through the peer review.
System is only as good as its constituents.
Right, yes.
It's not a foolproof system.
And the other thing is that, you know, not all of our readers are academics. Really. So they're also, when you're dealing with comic art, you're dealing with the fans, and you're dealing with, you know, we have subscribers who are professionals, cartoonists, and the executive editor of one of the famous comic book companies, and people like that. And they don't need peer review manuscripts. And one last point, because this is an important thing in my beliefs. One last point too, I think that's important, is that we don't get very many, but we encourage responses and reactions. And I think that's a type of peer review where, you know, if you can get people to write letters and criticize the articles, or point out we have gotten some very good letters like that just in recent years.
Has working for the journal been a very satisfying experience for you? Is it fun, or?
Yeah, it's fun. I learn a lot, and you know, it's professor. I have professor at home, so whatever I want to learn, I just ask him. Yeah.
And he tells you no matter whether he knows the answer or not, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I enjoy it because this journal covered all over the world.
Right.
And many countries I have never heard about cartooning. So when I work with him, I learn more, and we have chance to go to such countries like Kenya, Egypt, and we met a lot of cartoonists there. and interviewed cartoonists. And in China, we interviewed a lot of pioneer cartoonists, some 90 years old
Oh.
cartoonists. So through him, I learned a lot, and I met many important people, artists, make friends with them. So it's a very enjoyable work. Yeah.
So how did you meet Dr. Lent and
Um,
get involved with all this work?
I met him the first time in 1996 in Beijing. At that time, I worked for China Film Archive. Mainly, my job is doing research about foreign films. I translated some subtitles. We held, the China Film Archive held many film retrospectives about other countries, like Indian film retrospectives, Canadian film retrospectives, Japanese, and many countries all over the world. So at that time, I mainly researched films. And we held an international conference in 1996. He was the important guest because he is the chairman of Asian Film Cinema Studies Society. So I was a presenter at that conference. That's the first time for me present papers in English. So I was very nervous. And then he was the one drew my attention because from all the Western guests, he was the only one sit with the Asian people. Because every time when we had a break or had a lunch, we sit together around table. All the Asian people sit together. Some Western Europeans and American scholars, they sit in one table. I guess maybe the English or something, I don't know. But he was the only one sit in the Asian table. Then we talk, and I accompanied a Malaysian lady. She used to be his student, so I knew he studied or researched Asian countries many years, and then I feel interested to join the Asian Cinema Studies Society. So I asked him how can I become a member, and he said he will send me the journal, this Asian Cinema journal. So since then we established the contacts, and then I received the journal. So I think, this professor keep his promises. So it's very nice person. Then he wrote to me, asked me whether I feel interested in doing some research on Chinese animation. I never touched animation before. He said some people wrote about Chinese animation because it's mainly developed in Shanghai area. And he said he wondered whether Beijing has the animation industry, and asked me whether I was feel interested to do some interviews. I said okay. So I went to Beijing Science and Educational Film Studio. They had a animation department. So I interviewed directors, some women animators. Then I wrote an article, and mailed to him, and he edited it and published in Asian Cinema.